Albert had been waiting for this day for a long time. He lived in a small town where job opportunities were rare, so when he finally received a call for an interview in another city, he felt both nervous and excited. The company was well known, and getting this job could change his life completely. Early in the morning, he packed his bag with his documents, clothes, and some money, then took a long bus ride to the new city. The journey was tiring, and by the time he reached the city, it was already late evening. The city was bigger, brighter, and louder than Albert's hometown. Tall buildings surrounded him, and traffic lights glowed everywhere. He looked at his watch and realized he could not travel back home that night because the interview was scheduled early the next morning. He needed a place to rest, so he asked around and found a small, old hotel not far from the company's office. When he entered the hotel, it gave him a strange feeling. The building looked very old, with faded paint, broken lights, and long, empty corridors. The man at the reception barely spoke, only handed Albert a key and pointed upstairs. Tired from his journey, Albert did not think much about it and simply wanted to lie down and sleep. He reached his room and opened the door. At first glance, it seemed like any other small hotel room. A single bed, a table, and a lamp. But the air inside felt heavy and silent, almost like no one had stayed there for years. He placed his bag on the chair, sat on the bed, and tried to relax. He told himself, "It's just one night. Tomorrow, everything will be fine after the interview." But Albert had no idea that this hotel room would give him the most terrifying night of his life. After placing his bag on the chair, Albert lay back on the bed for a moment to rest his eyes. But as he looked up at the ceiling, his heart skipped a beat. The ceiling had deep cracks spreading across it like veins. In some places, the plaster seemed ready to break apart and fall at any second. For a moment, he imagined the whole ceiling collapsing on him while he was asleep. He quickly shook his head and whispered, "It's just an old building. Nothing to worry about." But deep inside, he still felt uneasy. He walked around the room, trying to distract himself. The wallpaper was peeling, the window glass was dusty, and the curtains smelled of dampness. Even the clock on the wall had stopped working, its hands frozen at 12. Albert thought it was strange, but he reminded himself that he only needed the room for one night. "I will be out of here by morning," he repeated in his mind. Still, the room felt different from other hotel rooms he had seen before. The silence was so heavy that even his footsteps sounded too loud. He switched on the lamp, but the light flickered, giving the room an even creepier feeling. The mirror above the table was cracked on one side, and when Albert looked at his own reflection, it appeared slightly distorted, as if the mirror was showing not just his face, but something darker behind him. He quickly turned away, his chest tightening with discomfort. Albert tried to calm himself by preparing his clothes for the interview. He placed his shirt and tie neatly on the chair and checked his documents twice. The normal routine gave him some comfort. Still, every time he glanced at the ceiling, he felt as if it was leaning lower and lower, like it might fall on him. That night, Albert realized this was no ordinary hotel room. It was a place filled with something strange and unwelcoming. After preparing his clothes and checking everything for the interview, Albert turned off the lamp and lay down on the bed. He was exhausted from traveling, but no matter how much he tried, sleep did not come easily. The room was too quiet, and the silence felt unnatural, as if the hotel itself was holding its breath. He closed his eyes, telling himself to relax, but then he heard it, a soft whisper. At first, Albert thought it was just the wind outside. He opened his eyes and listened carefully, but the window was closed and the curtains did not move. The whisper came again, longer this time, like a faint voice speaking words he could not understand. His heart began to beat faster. He sat up and looked around the room. No one was there. He tried to convince himself it was his imagination. "I'm just tired," he said softly. But then the lamp flickered on its own, glowing for a second before going dark again. The air turned suddenly cold, and Albert could see his own breath in the dim light. A shiver ran down his spine. He pulled the blanket over himself, but the uneasy feeling only grew stronger. It was not only the whispers. He began to sense that he was not alone. The space near the corner of the room felt heavy, as if someone was standing there in the shadows, watching him closely. Every time he turned his eyes toward that corner, he saw nothing, but the presence was still there. Albert lay still, afraid to move. His ears picked up small creaking sounds, like footsteps pressing against old wooden floors. The sound was inside the room, not outside in the corridor. He pressed his hands tightly together, whispering, "It's nothing. It's nothing." But deep inside, he knew the night was just beginning, and something very wrong was happening around him. Albert finally managed to close his eyes for a short while, but his sleep was restless. Strange dreams filled his mind, shadows moving, whispers calling his name, and walls that seemed to breathe. Suddenly, he woke up with a start. His body was cold with sweat, and his chest felt heavy, like something was pressing down on it. Slowly, he opened his eyes and looked up. What he saw made his blood run cold. The cracked ceiling above him was not still anymore. It looked as if it was moving, slowly rising and falling, like lungs breathing in and out. Albert blinked several times, thinking it was just his tired eyes playing tricks on him. But no, it was real. The ceiling bulged downward, the cracks widening as dust fell softly onto his bed. It seemed alive. His first thought was that the ceiling was going to collapse. He jumped off the bed, heart pounding wildly. Standing in the middle of the room, he stared at it, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The plaster shifted again, groaning as if something heavy was pressing against it from above. The sound was low and unnatural, not like any normal building noise. Albert's throat went dry. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body felt frozen. He could not take his eyes off the ceiling. He whispered to himself, "This isn't real. It can't be real." But the movement only grew stronger. The cracks spread wider, zigzagging like veins across the surface, and small pieces of plaster began to fall around him. At that moment, he realized this was no simple structural problem. The ceiling wasn't just breaking, it was breathing, moving closer and closer as if the room itself was alive and trying to swallow him whole. Albert backed slowly toward the door, his hands shaking, but deep inside he already knew something terrifying was about to reveal itself. Albert stood frozen near the door, staring at the ceiling as dust continued to fall. His breathing was fast, and his heart pounded so loudly he could hear it in his ears. He wanted to run out, but his hands shook too much to even touch the doorknob. Then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed something else. Something far more terrifying than the moving ceiling. In the farthest corner of the room, the shadows began to thicken. At first, Albert thought it was just a trick of the flickering light, but as he focused, he saw them clearly. The shadows weren't still, they were crawling. Slowly, dark shapes stretched across the walls, bending and twisting unnaturally. He squinted his eyes, trying to make sense of it, but then the shadows formed into shapes that looked almost human. Their outlines were tall and thin, with arms too long and fingers sharp like claws. Albert gasped and stepped back. His chest tightened as the air grew colder and heavier. The whispers returned, louder this time, echoing from every corner. He could not understand the words, but the voices sounded angry, as though many unseen people were talking at once. The shadows moved closer to his bed, their long arms reaching across the floor. Albert pressed his back against the wall, clutching the doorknob, but when he tried to open the door, it wouldn't move. It was locked tight, even though he had not locked it himself. Panic filled his body. The shadows reached higher, crawling up the walls toward the ceiling. Their movements were slow, deliberate, as if they were enjoying his fear. The light from the lamp flickered wildly, and in the split second of brightness, Albert saw their faces. Hollow, dark eyes and wide, twisted smiles. Terror shook every part of his body. The shadows weren't just illusions, they were alive, and they were surrounding him. Albert's hands trembled as he gripped the door, but it refused to open. His heart raced, and sweat dripped from his forehead. The shadows had already filled most of the room, twisting into horrible shapes. Just when he thought he could not take any more, the ceiling above him gave a loud crack. Dust and tiny pieces of plaster rained down on his shoulders. He looked up and froze. Hanging upside down from the cracked ceiling was a figure. At first, it looked like a human body, but when Albert's eyes adjusted to the dim light, his breath caught in his throat. The figure's skin was pale, almost gray, and its long black hair dangled downward, swaying slowly in the air. Its head tilted unnaturally, as though its neck had broken long ago. The worst part was its face. The figure had hollow eyes that glowed faintly, like dying embers, and they locked directly onto Albert. Its mouth stretched open, far wider than any human mouth should, revealing a dark, endless void inside. No teeth, no tongue, just black emptiness. Albert stumbled backward, almost falling as his legs shook uncontrollably. The whispers in the room grew into screams, hundreds of voices shouting all at once, filling his head with unbearable noise. He covered his ears, but the voices were inside him, not outside. The figure crawled lower from the ceiling, its long, bony hands stretching toward him. Albert's chest tightened. Every instinct told him to run, but there was nowhere to go. His knees weakened as the figure's face moved closer, only a few feet away. The smell of decay filled the air, and Albert felt his strength leaving him. At that moment, he realized the truth. This thing was not a dream, not his imagination. It was real, and it wanted him. Albert's whole body shook as the figure crept lower from the ceiling, its black hollow eyes fixed on him. He stumbled backward until his back hit the locked door. His trembling hands twisted the doorknob again and again, but it would not move. The lock felt like it was jammed from the inside, trapping him in the nightmare. The room shook as another loud crack split across the ceiling. More plaster fell, covering the floor and his clothes in white dust. The shadows in the corners hissed, their shapes bending like snakes, closing in on him. Albert's breath came in short gasps. He felt like the air itself was vanishing, as if the room no longer wanted him alive. Desperately, he slammed his fists against the door, screaming for help. But his voice was swallowed by the walls. No sound escaped. It was as though the hotel had sealed him inside, cutting him off from the world outside. His throat burned from shouting, but there was no answer. The figure's mouth opened wider, stretching to an impossible size. A chilling wind blew out from its mouth, carrying with it the smell of death. Albert covered his face, but the wind forced its way into his lungs. His body weakened, his knees buckled, and he fell to the floor. The shadows circled around him, whispering faster and faster. He reached for the door one last time, clawing at the wood with bleeding fingers, but it was useless. The figure dropped lower, its cold hand brushing against his shoulder. His heart pounded like a drum inside his chest. Albert realized the horrible truth: he was never meant to leave this room. The hotel had chosen him. The job interview, his plans, his future, none of it mattered anymore. Tonight, the hotel would keep him forever. Albert thought he was only spending one night in that hotel before his big interview. But that single night became the most terrifying experience of his life. The moving ceiling, the crawling shadows, and the ghostly figure from above, all of it proved one thing: sometimes the scariest places are not abandoned houses or forests, but the rooms we trust to keep us safe. What happened to Albert after that night? Did he survive, or was he lost forever in the hotel's curse? No one truly knows. But one thing is certain: if you ever stay in a strange hotel and hear whispers in the dark, don't ignore them. If this story chilled your spine, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more horror tales every week. Tell us in the comments, would you dare stay one night alone in that hotel? Turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next terrifying story.